The plane was falling. 183 passengers screamed. Oxygen masks swung wildly. But the woman in seat 14C just closed her book and stood up like she was leaving a coffee shop. Nobody knew her real name was Viper. Nobody knew she'd done the impossible before. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The airplane was falling from the sky. Sarah Mitchell sat in seat 14C, reading a paperback novel about gardening. Around her, passengers screamed. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, swinging wildly. A child cried somewhere behind her. The flight attendant's face was white with terror. Sarah calmly closed her book and stood up. The Boeing 777 shook violently. The cabin tilted at a dangerous angle. Luggage tumbled from overhead bins. A laptop smashed into the aisle. But Sarah moved through the chaos like she was walking through a quiet library. She was 39 years old. Brown hair pulled into a simple ponytail. No makeup. Wearing jeans and a gray sweater. She looked like a teacher or an accountant. Someone you would pass on the street without a second glance. Nobody on Flight 447 knew who she really was. 6 hours earlier, Sarah had boarded the flight from Tokyo to Los Angeles. The businessman next to her had asked what she did for work. She smiled and said something vague about consulting. He nodded and put in his earbuds. The conversation ended there. That was exactly what Sarah wanted. For 8 months she had been invisible. She rented a small apartment in Portland. She grew tomatoes on her balcony. She read books at coffee shops. She was nobody special. But that was a lie. Her real name was Sarah Viper Mitchell. She had flown fighter jets for 18 years. F-16s first, then F-22 Raptors. She had logged over 600 combat hours. She had shot down enemy aircraft. She had saved lives in situations that should have been impossible. Other pilots spoke her call sign with respect. Some with fear. Young aviators studied her missions and training. Instructors used her tactics as examples of perfect execution under pressure. Then one day she walked away from it all. She was tired. Tired of war. Tired of watching friends die. Tired of carrying the weight of being a legend. So she retired and disappeared into civilian life. She thought she could leave that person behind. The universe had other plans. The flight had been smooth for the first 5 hours. Sarah was halfway through her gardening book when she felt it. A vibration in the aircraft. Wrong. Subtle. Most passengers would not notice. But Sarah noticed everything. Her fingers tightened on the book. She looked up at the ceiling. 30 seconds later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. He tried to sound calm, but Sarah heard the edge of panic underneath. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. We need to descend to a lower altitude. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Sarah's heart rate did not change. She had heard that tone before. Something was very wrong. Then both engines exploded. Not a Hollywood fireball. A rapid mechanical failure. Critical parts disintegrating. Fuel lines rupturing. Hydraulic systems failing. The plane lurched hard to the left. Then it dropped. People screamed. The drop felt like an elevator cable snapping. Sarah's stomach lifted. The oxygen masks fell. Emergency lights flashed red throughout the cabin. Sarah had her mask on in 3 seconds. Combat training. Her hands moved without thinking. The businessman next to her was frozen, hands shaking, unable to secure his mask. Sarah reached over and fixed it for him, pressing it tight against his face. "Breathe slow and deep," she said calmly. He stared at her with wild eyes. How was she so calm? The plane was still falling. Sarah looked at her watch. Maybe 3 minutes until impact. Maybe less. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. A flight attendant shouted at her. "Ma'am? Sit down immediately." Sarah ignored her. She gripped the seat backs and pulled herself forward. The cabin tilted at a crazy angle. Other passengers were praying. Crying. Some had given up. Sarah had not given up. She reached the cockpit door and looked inside through the small window. Captain Reynolds was slumped against his harness, blood running down his face from a head wound. First Officer Jake Morrison sat in the right seat. He was 27 years old. This was his second year flying wide-body aircraft. His hands were frozen on the controls. Sweat poured down his face. His eyes were wide with terror. Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. Jake turned. "Who are you? Get out. You can't be in here." Sarah put her hand on his shoulder. Her voice cut through his panic like a knife. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. Call sign Viper. Retired Air Force fighter pilot. 4,000 hours in tactical aircraft. I'm taking command right now. Jake stared at her. What? Sarah squeezed his shoulder harder. Systems report. Quick. Tell me everything that's broken. Both engines failed. We lost 2 hydraulic systems. The third is dropping fast. We're in unpowered descent with almost no flight control. Sarah looked at the instruments. They were falling through 26,000 feet at 4,000 feet per minute. 7 minutes until they hit the ocean. Get the captain out of his seat, Sarah said. Strap him in the jump seat. Then get back here. Jake hesitated for only a second. Something in Sarah's voice told him to obey. He unbuckled the unconscious captain and pulled him backward. Sarah slid into the left seat. Her hands touched the controls. The yoke felt mushy, unresponsive. The hydraulic failures meant she had almost no authority. But there was still something. She used it exactly right. Jake got back into the right seat, breathing hard. Stop transmitting Mayday, Sarah said. What? But air traffic control can't help us now. How many flying hours do you have? 4,000 total. 900 in the 777. Good enough. I need you to be my co-pilot. Do exactly what I say. No questions. Can you do that? Jake nodded. His hand steadied a little. Someone had taken command. Someone who sounded like she knew what she was doing. They dropped through 24,000 feet. Sarah pulled back on the yoke, carefully trading altitude for airspeed. The descent rate decreased from 4,000 feet per minute to 3,200. Not enough. They were still going to hit the ocean in 6 minutes. Activate the ram air turbine, Sarah said. Jake pressed the button. A small turbine dropped into the airstream below the aircraft. It spun in the wind, generating minimal electrical power and hydraulic pressure. Some of the red warning lights changed to amber. Better. But not enough. Sarah stared at the fuel display. Both wings still carried thousands of gallons of jet fuel. The engines were dead, but the fuel was still there. An idea formed in her mind. It was absolutely insane. It violated every regulation in commercial aviation. But Sarah had done something similar once in an F-16 when her engine failed over enemy territory. Do you know how to manually dump fuel? Sarah asked. Jake looked at her like she was crazy. Yes, but why would we dump fuel? We're already falling. Listen carefully. This aircraft is now a glider with terrible glide characteristics. But if we dump fuel in a very specific way, I can create a weight imbalance. That will force the plane into a banking turn without engine thrust. We can use gravity and momentum to change our heading. Change heading to where? Sarah pointed at the navigation display. There's a chain of small islands west of here. Midway Atoll. It has an emergency runway. Long enough to land a 777. Jake checked the distance. That's 175 miles away. We can't glide that far. We can if I manage our energy perfectly. Start dumping fuel from the right wing. Maximum flow rate. Do it now. Jake hesitated. Now. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. Jake activated the dump valves. Fuel streamed from the right wing in a white mist. Sarah felt the plane respond as the weight distribution changed. She used the remaining hydraulic pressure to bank the aircraft right. The nose started to swing around. The plane was turning. But still falling. They dropped through 18,000 feet. Stop the dump, Sarah said. Now dump from the left wing. Jake obeyed. The weight shifted again. Sarah used the momentum to steepen the turn, bringing the nose around until they pointed west. She leveled the wings. 16,000 feet. Descent rate 2,200 feet per minute. Jake ran calculations on his display. Our glide ratio gives us maybe 155 miles. We're going to fall short by 20 miles. 20 miles is nothing. Sarah studied the wing configuration. The flaps were retracted. If she extended them just 5 degrees, she could change the wing's lift coefficient. Reduce the sink rate without creating too much drag. Extend flaps to 5 degrees. Jake reached for the flap lever with a shaking hand. The flaps extended slowly. The aircraft shuddered. The descent rate decreased to 1,800 feet per minute. Jake recalculated. We can glide 165 miles now. Still 10 miles short. What's the wind at Midway? Jake checked. East wind at 18 knots. Tailwind. That gives us maybe 4 extra miles. Sarah's mind raced through the calculations. Still 6 miles short. She needed more altitude. More glide distance. Then she remembered a technique from her fighter pilot days. A maneuver that stunt pilots used. Dangerous in a commercial aircraft. But they had no choice. Watch what I do, Sarah said. She pushed the yoke forward. The nose dropped. The aircraft accelerated. The airspeed climbed to 280 knots. Then Sarah pulled back hard, converting that speed back into altitude in a smooth arc. The aircraft climbed 400 feet before the speed bled off. "What was that?" Jake asked. "Porpoising. We trade speed for altitude, then altitude for distance. We're going to do it again." They porpoised down through 12,000 feet. Through 10,000. Through 8,000. Each time, Sarah timed it perfectly. Push forward, build speed, pull back, gain altitude. At 6,000 feet, Jake checked their position. "Midway is 55 miles ahead. We're actually going to make it." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Making it to Midway is only half the problem. We still have to land. Landing without engines. With minimal hydraulic control. On an island runway with no margin for error." At 4,000 feet, Sarah could see Midway through the windscreen. A tiny strip of land in the vast Pacific Ocean. "Extend landing gear," Sarah said. Jake looked at her in shock. "That'll create massive drag. We'll drop like a rock." "That's exactly what I want." "Do it." Jake extended the landing gear. The plane shuddered as the wheels lowered. They dropped from 4,000 feet to 2,500 feet in less than a minute. Flaps to 30 degrees. Jake extended the flaps. The nose pitched down hard. 1,500 feet. The runway was right in front of them. Sarah leveled the wings and aimed for the numbers at the start of the runway. But they were too high. Too fast. With no engines, she had no way to adjust. So she did something that would fail her in any flight school. She entered a forward slip. She crossed the controls, making the aircraft fly sideways through the air. The fuselage acted like an air brake, presenting its broad side to the wind. The plane shook violently. It felt like it was tearing itself apart. Jake gripped his armrests, eyes squeezed shut. But Sarah held the slip until they were 400 feet above the ground. Then she kicked the rudder and leveled the wings. They crossed the runway threshold at 180 feet. Way too high. Way too fast. The wheels slammed into the concrete at 185 knots. The tire screamed. Sarah stood on the brakes with all her weight. "Deploy speed brakes." Jake pulled the lever. Panels on the wings popped up, creating drag. They rolled down the runway. 140 knots. 120 knots. 100 knots. Sarah could see the end of the runway approaching. Fast. 80 knots. 60 knots. 40 knots. The runway end was 400 feet away. Then 200. Then 100. The aircraft rolled to a complete stop with 60 feet of concrete remaining. Sarah sat back and took her first full breath in what felt like an hour. Jake was crying. Tears ran down his face while he laughed and cried at the same time. He reached over and grabbed Sarah's hand. "We're alive. Oh my God, we're alive." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You did good work." Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane. Sarah helped Jake evacuate the passengers. The slides deployed and people poured out, stumbling onto the runway. Some were crying. Some were laughing. All of them were alive. Sarah was about to exit when she heard something that made her freeze. A voice on the military emergency frequency. Coming through the cockpit speakers. "Viper, this is Falcon 21. We have been monitoring your situation. We observed your approach and landing. Requesting confirmation of your identity." Sarah stood perfectly still. How did F-22 pilots know her call sign? Then she remembered. The military tracked all aircraft emergencies. Someone had looked up the passenger manifest. She walked back to the cockpit and picked up the radio microphone. "Falcon 21, this is Viper. Identity confirmed. All passengers and crew are safe." There was a pause. Then another voice came on. "Viper, this is Falcon 22. We just wanted to say it's an honor to share the sky with you. What you just did was impossible. But you made it look easy." A third voice. Older. Senior officer. "Viper, this is Falcon 20. We've all heard the stories about you. The missions you flew. The people you saved. And now we just watched you save 183 more. Your call sign still means something up here. It means never giving up even when the situation is hopeless." Sarah pressed the transmit button. Her voice was rougher than she wanted. "Falcon 20, thank you. That means more than you know. Viper out." She hung up the microphone and turned around. Jake was standing in the doorway staring at her. Were those really F-22 pilots? "Who are you?" Sarah realized there was no point in hiding anymore. "My call sign is Viper. I earned it during my third combat deployment when I shot down 4 enemy aircraft in a single mission while protecting a rescue helicopter. I flew F-16s for 12 years, then transitioned to F-22s. I commanded a fighter squadron. Over 600 combat hours. Silver Star recipient. Jake's mouth hung open. Why aren't you still flying? I was tired. Tired of war. Tired of watching friends die. I wanted to grow tomatoes and read books and be anonymous. Apparently the universe had other plans. Sarah smiled. Apparently. The passengers gathered on the runway. Someone had told them that the woman who saved them was a decorated fighter pilot. When Sarah climbed down the emergency slide, someone started clapping. Then everyone joined in. All 183 passengers and crew members applauded. Some were crying. Some were cheering. The businessman from seat 14B pushed through the crowd. He grabbed Sarah's shoulders. I have 2 daughters at home, he said, tears streaming down his face. I'm supposed to walk my oldest daughter down the aisle at her wedding next month. Because of you, I'm going to be there. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She walked to the edge of the runway and looked out at the ocean. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see a young Air Force officer approaching. He wore a flight suit with F-22 squadron patches. He saluted. Ma'am, my name is Captain Ryan Mitchell. Call sign Falcon 21. I was on patrol when we heard the emergency calls. When we confirmed your identity through the passenger manifest, every F-22 pilot in the air switched to the emergency frequency to listen. Why does it matter so much to you? Sarah asked. Because call signs like Viper aren't just names. They're standards we measure ourselves against. When training gets hard and missions seem impossible, instructors tell us about you. About the fighter pilot who never gave up. Your legacy isn't in the past. It's in every pilot who pushes themselves harder because they want to be worthy of flying in the same sky you flew in. Sarah felt something shift inside her. She had thought she could leave the military and leave behind the weight of being someone people looked up to. But Captain Mitchell was showing her that legacy wasn't something you could retire from. What happens now? She asked. That's up to you. But the Air Force would welcome you back in any capacity you choose. We need instructors. People who can train the next generation. Sarah thought about the garden she had planned to plant. The quiet life she thought she wanted. Maybe she had been wrong about what would make her happy. Maybe happiness wasn't found in escaping responsibility, but in accepting it. I'll think about it, she said. The sun set over Midway. Sarah sat on the runway with her back against one of the landing gear tires. Jake sat down next to her. When I woke up this morning in Tokyo, Jake said, I was wondering if I'd ever be more than just an average pilot. Now I helped save 183 lives alongside a living legend. You weren't just helping. You were essential. Being a good pilot isn't about flying perfect approaches in perfect weather. It's about keeping your head when everything goes wrong. As night fell, someone started a fire. The passengers gathered around it. Someone found a guitar and played soft music. People shared food and told stories. Sarah watched them and understood. This was what made flying worth all the risk and fear. These moments when you looked at people who were alive because of choices you made. She walked to the damaged 777 sitting at the end of the runway. Its engines destroyed but its fuselage intact. Every passenger seat empty because everyone had walked away alive. She put her hand on the landing gear. The metal was still warm from the friction of landing. She made a decision. She would go back to the Air Force. She would train pilots. She would accept that being Viper wasn't just a call sign from her past. It was who she was and who she would always be. The next morning, Coast Guard and Air Force transport aircraft arrived to evacuate the passengers to Hawaii. The reporters wanted interviews. Sarah tried to avoid them, but the passengers insisted she be recognized. She stood at a microphone with Jake beside her. How did you stay calm when everyone was panicking? A reporter asked. Panic is a choice, Sarah said. I chose not to panic because panic kills people. How did you learn to fly a commercial aircraft without engines? I spent 20 years in situations where the rule book didn't apply. Survival requires creativity and skill and a refusal to give up. The press conference ended. Sarah walked toward the C-130 that would take her to Hawaii. As she climbed the ramp, she heard jet engines overhead. She looked up. 4 F-22 Raptors flew in perfect formation above the island. They were flying a missing man formation, the aerial salute that fighter pilots used to honor fallen comrades. Except this time they were honoring someone who was very much alive. The 4 jets flew across the island in tight formation. Then one of them broke away and climbed toward the sky, leaving a gap that represented the honored pilot. Sarah stood at the top of the ramp with tears running down her face. The F-22s completed their salute and came back around for one more pass. As they passed overhead, she heard their voices on her handheld radio. One by one each pilot spoke her call sign. Viper. 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 Just that one word, spoken with respect and pride and brotherhood. Sarah raised her hand in salute. The 4 F-22s climbed back into the sky and disappeared into the clouds. Sarah lowered her hand and walked into the C-130. When the C-130 landed at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, hundreds of aviators stood at attention on the tarmac. The wing commander was at the front of the formation. When Sarah walked down the ramp, he saluted her. She returned the salute. "The Air Force is honored to have you back," he said. "Your office is ready. Your first class of students is waiting." Sarah looked at the assembled pilots. Young faces and old faces. Fighter pilots and transport pilots and helicopter pilots. She understood that she was looking at her family. She had tried to leave this family and live as a civilian. But you couldn't leave family. "I'm ready to start immediately," she said. That evening, Sarah stood in her new office at Hickam. The walls were decorated with photos of F-22s and F-16s. Aircraft she had flown and loved. A plaque on the desk had her call sign engraved on it. She sat down and pulled out a notepad. She started writing her curriculum for the first class of students she would train. She wrote about decision-making under pressure. About using every resource available, even when the situation seemed hopeless. About the responsibility of holding people's lives in your hands. She wrote about technical skills and tactical maneuvers. But mostly she wrote about mindset and attitude and the refusal to accept defeat. Captain Mitchell knocked on her door. "The investigation into Flight 447 is underway," he said. "Early findings suggest the dual-engine failure was caused by a manufacturing defect affecting multiple aircraft. Your emergency landing potentially saved hundreds of other lives by identifying the problem before more aircraft failed. Boeing is grounding similar aircraft for emergency inspections." He paused. "There's something else. The story of Flight 447 has spread beyond military aviation. Commercial pilots around the world are studying what you did. Airlines are updating their emergency procedures based on your techniques. Your one landing may have changed commercial aviation safety forever." Sarah absorbed this information quietly. The sun set over Hickam Air Force Base. Sarah stood at her window watching F-22s take off for evening training missions. She thought about the businessman who would walk his daughter down the aisle. About the grandmother who would hold her grandchild. About all the futures that existed because she refused to let an aircraft fall from the sky. The last F-22 of the evening took off and climbed toward the stars. Sarah watched it until it disappeared into the darkness. She turned away from the window and looked at her desk covered with lesson plans and training schedules. She smiled. She knew exactly who she was and exactly what she was meant to do. She was Viper. Tomorrow she would begin training the next generation of pilots who would carry that same commitment to excellence. That same refusal to let people die when there was any chance that skill and determination could save them. She was home. Not in a place but in a purpose. And she would never run from that purpose again. Jake appeared in her doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without saying anything. They stood together looking out at the airfield. "What are you going to do next?" Sarah asked. "I submitted my application to transfer to the Air Force," Jake said. "I listed you as my preferred instructor." Sarah nodded. "I'll accept you into my program. But understand that I'll be harder on you than anyone else. Because I know what you're capable of." Jake smiled. "I wouldn't want it any other way." They stood in silence for a moment. "Before today," Jake said, "I thought being a hero meant doing something extraordinary that nobody else could do. But now I understand. Being a hero means doing what needs to be done, even when it's terrifying. Even when it seems impossible. You showed me that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway." Sarah told him to go home and get some rest. Jake headed for the door but stopped and turned back. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me," Sarah said. "Start preparing. When you show up for training, I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed." Jake left. Sarah sat back down at her desk and continued writing her curriculum. She thought about all the pilots who would sit in her classroom and learn from her. The ripple effect of teaching one pilot could save hundreds of lives over the course of a career. She finished her curriculum at midnight and leaned back in her chair. She had saved 183 lives today. But more importantly, she had remembered who she was and why she had become a pilot in the first place. She became a pilot because she wanted to protect people. Because she wanted to master a skill that few people ever mastered. Sarah stood and walked to the window one last time. She looked out at the darkened airfield where F-22s sat waiting for tomorrow's missions. She put her hand on the glass and made a promise to herself and to every pilot who would train under her. She would never let another pilot face an impossible situation unprepared. She would share everything she knew and demand excellence in return. She smiled and turned away from the window. She picked up her curriculum and her coffee cup and walked out of her office, ready to begin the next chapter of her life. She was Viper. And she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. For the first time in 8 months she felt complete. Tomorrow she would stand in front of her first class of students and tell them the story of Flight 447. She would use that story to teach them about responsibility and courage and the refusal to accept defeat. She would tell them that being a pilot was the greatest privilege and the heaviest burden. And if they weren't willing to accept both, they should leave now before they got someone killed. When her students graduated and went on to fly their own missions, when they faced their own emergencies and made their own impossible decisions, they would carry with them the lessons of Viper. The legend who came out of retirement to save 183 lives and then came back to make sure that future pilots could do the same. Sarah walked out of the building into the warm Hawaiian night. She breathed in the smell of jet fuel and ocean salt. She felt at peace for the first time since she had retired. She had tried to run from her calling. Tried to be someone she wasn't. But the universe had put her on that flight for a reason. She had been given a second chance to do what she did best. And she wasn't going to waste it. She was Viper. And her work wasn't done. It was just beginning.